Prior to discussing the subject of today's video, I want to briefly introduce why I think this topic is quite important and ought to be discussed more often in the historical discourse. Now, as we know, the Ottoman Empire ruled a significant portion of the Balkans for most of its history, and under its rule throughout most of the period, non-Muslims experienced a relative level of religious and legal autonomy as long as they paid their taxes to the Sultan. Now, obviously the level of autonomy that they experienced varied depending on the time period that they were in, as well as the foreign threats the empire was dealing with. However, during the brutal suppression of different rebellions and insurrections throughout the final decades of the empire, the press, particularly in Western Europe and the United States, were quick to rightfully condemn the Ottoman government for the frequent massacre of non-combatants at the hands of military forces and other Ottoman subjects. For example, during the brutal suppression of the Bulgarian April Uprising in 1876, the daily news media outlet in the United Kingdom quickly shed light on what was going on, and the Russian Empire actually used this event as a pretext to go to war with the Ottomans in 1877. Similarly, during the infamous Armenian Genocide in 1915, the New York Times immediately brought to attention the atrocities that were being carried out against minority groups at the hands of the new Young Turk government in World War I, who had gained power through a coup in 1908. Unfortunately, the ethnic cleansing of Muslims from the Balkan Peninsula during the formation of the new nation states did not receive the same level of attention. Southampton University historian Mark Levene reinforces this in his book on Genocide in the Age of Nation States, and he points out that the Victorian Republic in the 1870s paid far more attention to the massacres of Bulgarian Christians under the Ottomans in comparison to that of Bulgarian Muslims under the invading Russian forces. He also notes that during the Congress of Berlin in 1878, following the Russo-Turkish War, the great powers who supported the idea of the nation-state brushed aside the ethnic cleansing of Muslims and paid little attention to it. Similarly, contemporary historians and professors such as Dr. Jelena Tosic note that the forced mass displacement of Muslims out of the Balkans during the era of territorial contraction of the Ottoman Empire has only become a topic of recent scholarly interest in the 21st century. Therefore, as we can see, the persecution of Muslims during this period from this region under other empires and the newly formed nation states has primarily become a subject of recent inquiry, and whilst it was happening, it was sometimes brushed under the rug in comparison to atrocities that the Ottoman Empire was responsible for. Hence, it is important that attention is brought to it so that more people know the full story of what happened. Now, on a side note, please excuse my pronunciation of names and cities. I don't speak Turkish, Russian, or any of the national languages within the Balkans, so I'm probably going to mess it up a bit here and there. I'll start by discussing the ethnic cleansing that took place during the Ottoman-Habsburg Wars, specifically between 1683 and 1739. Now, before we begin, to provide a brief amount of context, in the year 1683, as a result of border tensions and Austrian incursions into Ottoman territory in pursuit of Hungarian raiding parties, the Ottoman Empire laid siege to the city of Vienna and were repulsed by a Christian coalition relief force. And this led to the subsequent War of the Holy League, which lasted until 1699. Now, whilst Christian irregulars and rebellious Highlanders had been raiding Muslims in Herzegovina, Bosnia and Albania prior to the Battle of Vienna, the first major mass expulsion of Muslims from areas in the Balkan Peninsula occurred during the War of the Holy League, where the Habsburg Empire and her allies conquered most of Hungary and parts of Croatia from the Ottoman Empire, and subsequently virtually all of the Muslims in Slavonia, Croatia and Dalmatia were forced into exile by the end of 1699. Oxford historian Peter H. Wilson estimates this total number to have been around 160,000 people. Mitja Velikonja states in his book on Bosnia-Herzegovina that this cleansing of Muslims enjoyed the full benediction of the Catholic Church. He also states that the entire Muslim population of the Croatian city of Lika, who made up roughly 2/3 of the total population, were forced to convert to Catholicism or be expelled. Now, since Croatia at this point had largely transferred from Ottoman to Habsburg control, the majority of buildings made by the Muslims in Croatia were raised during this period, as supported by Andrej Mohorovičić in his book on Croatian architecture. Following these events, there were a few more instances of expulsion over the next few decades. According to Exeter historian Jeremy Black, in 1709 the Orthodox Serbian irregulars massacred Muslims in Montenegro, however the death toll for this is uncertain. In 1716 Austria entered into a renewed conflict with the Ottoman Empire, and during this war they were able to occupy northern Bosnia and Serbia until they were reconquered by the Ottoman Empire in the Austro Turkish War of 1735 to 1739. Now, this meant that between the years 1716 and 1739, Holy Roman Emperor Charles VI offered the Bosnian Muslim population the choice to either convert to Christianity or depart into Ottoman territory, as noted by Jordanian professor Muhamed al-Arnaut of Al-Bayt University. Now, that mostly concludes the major expulsions of Muslims during the Ottoman wars with Austria. Historian Justin McCarthy notes that when the Russian Empire annexed the Crimea in 1779, approximately 100,000 Crimean Tatars fled the Crimea and surrounding areas for the Ottoman Empire. Immediately after the Crimean War in the mid-19th century, they were joined by a further 300,000 Crimean Tatars and an unknown number of Nogai Tatars. Their place was taken by Christian subjects of the Tsar. Now, in the east, Russian conquest was to lead to a great exchange of Muslim and Christian populations. In 1800, the area that is today's Armenia, central Georgia and Azerbaijan was a loosely governed part of the Persian Empire. Now, the Russians took the region in a series of annexations and conquests from 1801 to 1829, and a large number of Azeri Turks fled to Iranian Azerbaijan in 1806 to 1807. Also note that after the Greek rebellion of 1822 to 1830, many Muslims from within the new Greek kingdom were gone, and all had either migrated or died. Now fast forward about half a century to the late 1870s. Recall how I mentioned earlier about the brutal suppression of the 1876 Bulgarian uprisings were used as a pretext by the Russian Empire to invade Ottoman Bulgaria. Now, this took place during the new Russo-Turkish War of 1877 to 1878. Now, this invasion resulted in hundreds of thousands of Muslims being attacked. According to Dr. Douglas Arthur Howard, almost half of the pre-war 1.5 million Muslim population of Bulgaria was now gone. Approximately 200,000 died and the remainder fled. It is estimated that between 1880 and 1911, an additional 350,000 Bulgarian Muslims left the country. Furthermore, many Georgian Muslims also migrated westward as a result of cars being ceded to Russia. Now, whilst this was going on, the Serbian and Montenegrin armies were taking advantage of the conflict and simultaneously ethnically cleansed the Albanian Muslim population of Serbia and Montenegro. Estimates of this total number cleansed varies between 30,000 and 70,000 Muslims. In addition to this, after 1878, Bosnia was occupied by Austria-Hungary in the Berlin Congress. Seeing this as a betrayal by the Ottoman Empire, Bosnian Muslims actually resisted the Austro-Hungarian forces in nearly 60 military engagements. Between 1878 and 1918, 150,000 Bosnians left the region into other Ottoman territory such as Anatolia, the Levant and the Maghreb. Another point to note is that according to some historians such as McCarthy, when Greece expanded to the north in 1880, 70,000 more Muslims left the newly occupied territories and fled to the Ottoman Empire. Now we get on to the Balkan Wars and World War I. To provide some context, after seeing Ottoman weakness following the Italo-Turkish War of 1911, Bulgaria, Serbia, Montenegro and Greece took advantage of the situation and invaded the remaining Ottoman territory in the Balkans in what was known as the First Balkan War of 1912. According to Geert Henrik Ahrens, the invading armies and Christian insurgents committed a wide range of atrocities against the Muslim population. During this war, hundreds of thousands of Turks and Greek Muslims fled their villages or converted to Orthodoxy, although many were indeed allowed to reconvert back to Islam later on. During World War I, it is estimated by historians such as Indiana professor Rudolf Rommel that at least 128,000 Muslims were killed by Russian troops and Armenian irregulars during the period between 1914 and 1915. A further 40,000 Muslims were killed by Armenian troops in the region occupied by the Russian Empire between 1917 and 1918. Now, whilst this is far too much to go into now, historians such as Taner Akşam and Arnold J. Toynbee have written extensively on the massacres of Muslims during the Greco-Turkish War, particularly during the Greek retreat into Western Anatolia, where they employed a brutal scorched earth policy, desecrating the fertile Meander Valley. According to historian Justin McCarthy, between the years 1821 to 1922, from the beginning of the Greek War of Independence to the fall of the Ottoman Empire, approximately 5 million Muslims were driven from their lands and another 5.5 million died, some killed in wars, others perishing as refugees from starvation or disease. McCarthy has, however, been criticised by other historians for being pro-Turkish, particularly in regards to discourse surrounding the Armenian genocide. However, scholarly critics such as Donald Bleacher have stated that despite this, McCarthy's study on the persecution of Muslims during the contraction of the Ottoman Empire is indeed a valuable perspective and a necessary corrective in contemporary academia. Furthermore, historian Mark Beyondich estimates that from 1878 to 1912, up to 2 million Muslims left the Balkans either voluntarily or involuntarily, while Muslim casualties in the Balkans during 1912 to 1923, within the context of those killed and expelled, may well have exceeded some 3 million. Now, there exists some literature in Turkey dealing with these events, but outside of Turkey, the events are largely unknown to the world public. Before ending this video, I'd like to make a few notes and disclaimers. First of all, it's important to note that we don't have a single accepted figure on the total number of Muslims who were exiled or died during this period as a result of ethnic cleansing campaigns. Different historians have come to different figures and conclusions, and I'll link some additional ones in the description. Furthermore, aside from McCarthy's total figure, the other historians I listed, as well as my video overall, do not include the hundreds of thousands killed during the often neglected Circassian genocide. Now, to add to this, I stated earlier at the start of the video how some historians suggest that these events were often swept under the rug whilst they were happening. Now, I should note that we don't have a definitive reason as to why this was the case. Historian Mark Levene, for example, suggests that it may well have been due to greater powers dismissing it as part and parcel of the formation of modern nation states. However, that said, we don't have a definitive reason why.